Thank you all for coming out. Just let's bring the panelists up here real quick. We have Rob and Kevin, the protagonists of the film. If they want to come up. We, of course, have Jack, the director, Jack Riccibono. We have Shane Slattery Quintanilla, if I have that right, who is the producer and co-director of photography for the film. We have Troy Morley, Assistant United States Attorney and Tribal Liaison for the District of South Dakota, here with us today. We have Karen Diver, Special Assistant to the President for Native Affairs in the White House Domestic Policy Council. And we have Bill Keller, Editor-in-Chief of the Marshall Project, a nonprofit news organization focused on the criminal justice system. And he also spent some time with the New York Times. And I'm Jamel. We also have Chris Eyre, the executive producer, who I made a mistake. I apologize.
Do I have a name tag?
One more chair. Yes, you're right over here, Chris. Over here.
So I guess I want to start with Rob and Kevin. It's been, I think, about 2 years since shooting finished on the film. So could you just, first, did you ever expect to be at the White House talking about the movie? And second, could you say a little more about your life since then? What's happened since the movie finished?
Thanks for watching. My life in the last 6 months, I got released in September, serving that prison sentence. And my life has been very wonderful at this time because I'm now being proactive with my life. And so more proactiveness means less reactiveness to my surroundings. I totally had to break the victim stance at where I was living and the excuses I used to rationalize my actions. So I'm doing a lot of like impressive things, more or less impressed with myself, embracing my responsibilities as an adult and to stay law-abiding and to also realize the obligations and responsibilities I have as a teacher to my young brothers here, which I totally own all my actions. What you see on that film is my decisions, whether or not they're right or wrong, but I totally own them. So I took inventory, and now I totally want to live a different life right now and be a blessing and an asset to my people. I don't want to become a part of the problem anymore. I want to be a big part of the solution or a small part, and that's totally taught me what it was to be humble. So yeah, my life is good right now. Very thankful for being here. Never once thought I'd be at the White House, but since I'm here, it's been a long time coming.
Hi, I'm Kevin. I don't know, like, shortly after that film, I went to prison, even though it looked like I was doing good, but I don't know, living in that environment kind of brought me back down again. I brought myself down, but I got out February 2nd of 2015 actually, and I kind of went back to the same stuff. Well, within the past 3 months, like, I've kind of changed, like, not a lot, but I've been doing a lot of changes, and, like, this helped me, like, see a lot, like, meet a lot of people, and now it's, like, I really don't know how to explain it. It's hard for me to even watch this film because it was a lot of low points in my life and it's embarrassing, but it's already out there, so. But, you know, like, I've learned from it. A lot of people will learn from it. Hopefully they will if I go tell my story. Hopefully I can help other people that were feeling the same way I was back then that are today. And I can tell them how I got through it, because right now, my past 3 months, I've been working a lot on myself, on how to stay out of trouble. And it's been kind of hard not going back to the old ways that I grew up knowing, making bad decisions. It's hard for me to be a role model when I've been doing all this bad stuff all the time. But right now, my main goal is to help someone, like, to not go through what I went through and see all the suffering and pain. And, like, being here, I never expected to be here. Like, this is my first time ever being on a plane, being out of state. Like, it's new for me. I'm excited. I'm nervous. I don't know what to say in front of you guys. So yeah, I'm pretty nervous. So, but also, I want to help because I don't want people to go through what I went through, because it's not a good thing. Not a good thing. I spent most of my life locked up running the streets of law, like disobeying the law, and that's all I see now. Little 11, 12-year-olds becoming felons, 3 or 4 time felons at 11, 12 years old. And they're not even young enough to be able to, like, comprehend or know what's, like, think about their future. And their lives are already ruined, you know what I mean? Like, I want to be able to stop, like, have them think before they make them decisions, because they're too young to be able to ruin their lives that early. And you know how hard it is out here to get a job being a felon. And my whole goal is to keep moving up. With that, I'll end it.
Thank you. So, Jack, Chris, Shane, what brought you to this project? Where did the inspiration come from? And this is something I'm very curious about. Was it a long-time interest? Something you stumbled into? Just say more about how you got to the place where we have this film.
Sure. Yeah, it was definitely and has been a very interesting journey with this project. I mean, I'm from New York, and the first time I went to the White Earth Reservation was about 8 years ago to shoot a short film about the wild rice for the Slow Food Organization. And about 2 years after that, my producing partner read about this issue of inner city gang culture migrating from prisons and cities out to these remote native communities, and we started to look into it, and there was very little out there. And so eventually I said, let me go back to the reservation where I know some people and see, is it happening there, and will people talk to me about it? And so in October of 2010, I went back to the tribal college, and that's where I met Rob. And we kind of hit it off. Rob came up to me after the class and said, oh, you want to know about native gangs? Like, come talk to me. And so we had a coffee, and he said,
Is this accurate? Is this what happened?
That man is lying. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, he's pretty accurate.
And yeah, so I proposed to him. I said, well, what if we come back and film you? And he said, oh, okay. And that led to 14 shoots over about 2.5 years. So yeah, I mean, the project, evolved over that time, but yeah, it's definitely a surprise to find ourselves here today. So.
And for me, it really was meeting Rob on that first development shoot that I knew we had a feature film, because we met him and we knew immediately that he was an equal. He could be a collaborator. He could be someone on the project who we could work over a long period of time. He was really intelligent, really knew his people's history, but he also, of course, had this really conflicted background that he was able to speak very eloquently about, and that's what made it clear to me that this was something that had legs.
I got involved when Jack emailed me and said that he was going to come to Santa Fe, where I live in New Mexico, and he showed me a cut of the movie. And Rob and Kevin are pretty charismatic guys, and right away I said, wow. And it's about something important. It's about rehabilitation, which I totally saw right away in the movie. And I said, what a great opportunity. And so we started collaborating together after the movie was shot, and they did the 14 shoots that I wasn't on, thank God. And I heard all the great stories afterwards, but yeah, I mean, it's been a pleasure to get to know all these guys, and especially Rob and Kevin, and get to really get to know them.
Yeah, Jack and Shane, sort of, could you speak more about the themes you're trying to get across in the film? I mean, we all saw it, but kind of a, an artist's eye view of what you were trying to communicate.
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it was important to us for the project to be very sort of character-driven and immersive. So, I mean, I've made a lot of different kinds of projects in the past, narrative shorts, videos, commercials, and I feel that, again, a great story is really also about great characters and great subjects and caring about the people you see. And so for me, this project was really, again, meeting Rob and seeing what a dynamic person he was, and he was very unique in his ability to kind of speak about his situation and let you into this world that I think most Americans have never seen before and don't know very much about, while still having to navigate it and try to find a way out. And so, the approach was to really try to tell their stories in an intimate way, to sort of get past the statistics and the sort of preconceived notions that people might have about these issues. Because, again, every time, there are some stories that come out, and it's usually about, again, horrible stats or, certain things like that, and it doesn't get at the, at the sort of humanity of some of these issues. So I think in seeing their stories, hopefully the film helps you have some more empathy for the situation, which is very particular, and then, starts a conversation and, raises some awareness about how to address what's going on in Indian country in some of these communities.
And one of the things that we fought hard for and we thought was really important when we were shooting with Rob and he did get sent to prison, you see in a lot of documentary TV shows and films when someone gets sent to prison, the door slams shut and that's the end of that chapter. You might see them when they get released, but we felt it was extraordinarily important to go into prison and spend some time inside where, prison plays a big role in these men's lives, and it's important that we understand that as storytellers and as viewers. So we thought that was an important issue to cover, and then of course the aspect of Rob reconnecting with his writing within prison we thought was a really important element that helped, again, because it's so character driven, for us to understand Rob, who he is, beyond just, again, his rap sheet, to understand that he's an artist and that he looked to writing for something more in his life, which I'd rather hear him speak to.
Yeah, writing gives me a chance to escape from the current situation. When I write, I'm not a mascot. I'm not dehumanized. Like, I can actually create individuals that interact with each other. And it gives me a chance to go back in time and to do some things that I was never allowed to do, but I was wanted to do. So I really enjoy writing, and I write from a place of love, but also a place of trauma. I just love creating, and the more and more I'm up here, the more and more I'm speaking to people, I understand that I have a voice that carries a lot of power, and with that carries a lot of responsibility. So I totally don't want to mess this up, and I want to preserve it, and I want to inspire people to find what makes them powerful, because we come from nations of powerful. We weren't nations of victims. We were nations of people that were once powerful, to the point where we flourished from east to west coast, from the North and South Pole. And that's kind of what I want to do now. I want to empower people to make them understand that they can be equally as powerful or more powerful. We need to be more than 1.8 or 1.9 million, because we can't lose 2 million Native Americans. We'd be totally done. So I want to be part of a big solution, and I can't do that by sending a message saying, you know what, you're victimized. You know what, you're poor. You know what, you're disadvantaged. Nah, I will get more success with that, telling you, you're powerful. You have that responsibility to share that with the next person. That's kind of where I'm at in my life right now. So I love writing and I love creating. And I need to dream. I need to dream in order to create. Because if I don't, I'm not creating. That's where I'm at in my life. And that's what I want to share with people.
Before the movie began, Karen and I had a brief conversation about sort of this challenge of talking about and depicting Native life. There's the disadvantage and the suffering and the injustice, and there's the other part. So, Karen, I'd actually like to hear what you thought about the film and sort of how this relates to what you're trying to do from your position here at the White House.
So up until the middle of November, I actually served for 9 years as an elected tribal leader of a tribal nation in Minnesota, the other end of the state, Fond du Lac, woohoo. No offense, brothers. You know, in fact, Mashka was in. That was on my reservation where you went, young man. So, you know, and looking at the movie and kind of bringing from my tribal leader perspective to now and, you know, at an advisory position within the administration, you know, the thing that first kind of struck me when I first just saw just the premise of the movie is, you know, people kind of look at Native issues either from a historical perspective, you know, kind of the noble savage and all of that, or you go to the future and you see the culmination of 250 years of failed Indian policy, 300 years of oppression and isolation, and you know, it's something, the stereotypes that a lot of Native people deal with on a day-to-day basis, right? The drunk Indian or the high Indian or the criminal Indian, and or else they see casinos, right? But they don't see the resiliency that, you know, people are still here and surviving, and that they cope with trauma and they heal. And as a tribal leader, one of the things I really struggled with was to change the conversation around alcohol and chemical dependency to one of mental health. We are very free in our community of talking about alcohol abuse and drug abuse, and how much pain that brings us, how many young people we're losing, especially to opioids. But we never really talk about why people use. And at the beginning of the movie, I was almost brought to tears by Rob reading his jacket, I guess they call it. And he talked about his foster experience and his trauma. And, you know, until it's okay for Rob to say and be accepted within his own community of saying, I hurt, and I was trying not to hurt, and I was self-anesthetizing, and I'm suffering from depression, and I have post-traumatic stress, and everything else that comes with our grandparents, great-grandparents, parents, boarding school experiences, you know, every kind of trauma that can be befallen upon a person because they are placed in a vulnerable circumstances. Boarding schools, they're vulnerable children. Predators go there. Poverty, people prey on the poor. Our women, they struggle with chemical dependency, and they're preyed on by sex traffickers. So these are cumulative effects of kind of the situation that Native people have found themselves in an awful long time. Today, a part of the reason why I'm happy to be a part of this administration is, one, he understands Indian country and why that trauma is there, and why it creates a set of circumstances that are complicated in terms of moving our own people towards better outcomes, whether it's educational outcomes, whether it's chemical dependency outcomes, whether it's recidivism rates. This is the first president to really start talking strongly about not only empowering Native nations in terms of them being the best to find their own solutions, but they're also talking about things like criminal justice reform. And too many times, you're labeled once as a criminal or an offender, and that's the tag that you end up having for the rest of your life, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy over and over again. You don't get to be a young person who is addicted, who made a mistake, and then get over it. Not for people of color. You got your white-collar criminals and stuff like that, and for some reason it's a different story for them, but it becomes an identifier that's too much associated with race and communities of color. So whether we're talking about empowering Native nations, whether we're talking about criminal justice reform, whether we're talking about attacking opioids, whether we're talking about valuing women and dealing with sex trafficking, all of these things show the cumulative effect and have the support of this administration. So to be a Native voice and a former tribal leader at the table, so I can tell stories like that and say that they have real faces to them and they're not just statistics, it's kind of a special place to be, and I get excited about being at the White House too.
Likewise, Troy. Yeah, I will give you my mic. Okay, all right.
We share.
Okay, all right. Could you talk a little bit about how you took in this film and how it relates to your work?
Well, previously, before joining the Department of Justice, I was a tribal judge, special judge to the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa Indians, where I'm enrolled. Rob and Kevin could be 20 cousins I have. I mean, you guys did a great job telling the story, but it's not a new story if you're from Indian country. So as far as how this film affects me, I know it, I've lived it, I understand where they're coming from. I think it's a very good message for everybody to take in and learn. One of the things that struck me about it is, you notice you're about halfway through the film before our culture starts playing a role in the film. And one thing we've learned, and I've learned since being with the department, is that a lot of young men's first exposure to our culture occurs in prison. They get to participate in sweats, they get to participate in ceremonies, and that's their, correct me if I'm wrong, Rob, but that's your free time. That's your way to get away from the grind. That's your way to get away from the daily grind of being locked up inside. And so that's where a lot of the culture starts to infiltrate these young men. Yet when we're putting them in halfway houses when they are coming out of prison, they're losing that connection with their culture again, because we're taking people from White Earth, we're taking people from Standing Rock, and we're putting them in the closest large city we can find, because that's where the halfway house is. So now we have young men from reservations being told, hey, get a job, hey, pay rent, hey, this is how you're gonna live your daily life, yet it has no applicability to them when they go back to the reservations, because when they get back there are no jobs. There is no rent, there are no bills to be paid. It's the daily grind that you saw that they were living on the film. So one of the things we've started in South Dakota with a reentry program is we've reached out to spiritual leaders on the reservations, and they're now making contact with these young men as soon as they hit the halfway houses. So they're keeping up with their ceremonies, they're keeping up with their traditions and their culture, and they're continuing that mentorship as they get back onto the reservations. We look for people like Rob here who have made that transition and have stayed away from prison and the criminal justice system for quite some time, and we use them as mentors to try and help these people who are coming out of prison now to say, hey, this is what worked for me, this is how I avoided going back. So that's what we're doing right now.
So, on the topic of criminal justice reform, Bill, I watched this film, and what immediately comes to mind, and I guess it's just what I'm immersed in on my day-to-day, are issues of policing and in inner cities, and sort of this whole world of concern. And so I'm curious whether you were thinking the same thing, or kind of your mind going to the same place, and how many parallels you may see between the reservation and the kind of the inner cities that I think a lot of policymakers are looking at and thinking about right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, one of the things that we try to do as journalists is put a human face on complicated problems. And what this film does is a very sweet job of putting a human face on problems of the criminal justice system. And in a number of ways, it is analogous to what we see in the inner cities. Certainly by the statistics, Native American men are, I think, 4 times as likely to be incarcerated as white men in this country. They're disproportionately thrust into the juvenile justice system at an early age. They're disproportionately shot. This all begins to sound familiar, especially in the, all the stories we've had since Ferguson and thereafter. The biggest difference, and I say this with a sort of sense of shared shame for our profession, is that this is mostly out of sight. I mean, the inner city is something that we can't completely ignore because it's, the inner cities are our neighborhoods. But the reservations are in the Dakotas and Minnesota and Oklahoma for the most part. They're in enclaves that are generally some distance from the cities, and they're a kind of different, and to some journalists, I think, impenetrable culture. That's not an excuse, that's an explanation. But this made me want to go home and assign some stories about the plight of the criminal justice, the way the criminal justice system treats Native Americans.
Jack and Shane, if you could inspire editors to start assigning stories about this stuff, would you consider that a job well done, mission accomplished?
Absolutely, yeah.
I would actually consider it a success when the beauty and breadth of Indian country is covered in full, and not just those things which would otherwise be sensational.
If only you thought to put the reservations in states where the newspapers haven't all died.
I think we wanted to have a little time for Q&A as well. So I guess raise your hand and I will try to call on you, and just you can direct the question to the panel as a whole or to someone in particular. And your hand went up first.
How far along have you gotten to finishing your book? Because you said you were writing a book about the 11-year-old looking back on his life. And then the second question is, the man at the end of the film, he sort of seemed like someone who was like somebody who comes in to rehabilitate young people, maybe? I saw just a sliver of that, and I'm wondering if that's anything that's popular that actually happens. Because it sounds like rehabilitation happens after prison. Why isn't there a program, or is there a program that happens before prison to keep it from going to prison?
I'm about a third of the way finished with my book. I planned it to be 600 pages, so that's a third of the way finished, but another project showed up that I really enjoy writing. That's yet to be talked about. I'm hoping to do some more collaborating with Chris Eyre, very good friend of mine. Rehabilitation, it started way before prison, because as much as I'd like to say that I was a victim of circumstance, that's not the case. Like, I totally knew better. I'm not a victim of severe penalties or mandatory minimums. Behind every prison sentence was me committing a crime. And I think that's very important. The fact that I did a 7-month treatment program in my last incarceration, it validated that, because I totally let everything go. And I had to face the man in the mirror, and that was myself. And I totally let him off the hook. I became an angry person, not by being abused, but by learning the atrocities that happen to the indigenous peoples. And it totally gave me a reason to hate other people and to do the things to myself and my community. And that's where it becomes really haunting and chilling. That's why I still have a hard time watching this. I've watched it 7 times, and it gets harder and harder. It doesn't get easier. So rehabilitation, that happened a long time ago. So I just neglected the potential that I have and the responsibilities that I have. So I'm totally embracing that right now. And I don't want to lose this momentum, because if I do, I don't think I can recover once again. So I got to keep this going, and I have to keep believing in myself, and I got to keep believing that there's hope. Hope is the only thing that's keeping me alive right now, and I don't want to lose that.
Told. I think both of you, the stories are very impactful, and the stories need to be told. I think, how did you all develop the trust to allow those stories to be told in the director, and then conversely, how did you build the trust in the communities to really show those intimate experiences? I know oftentimes building that trust locally is critical to getting into the community and having these conversations, and you're showing a lot of different stories there besides both of you. And I think, how did you kind of find an enclave into the community and a way in there to show the story?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was definitely a long process, and definitely a leap of faith for these guys to trust me with their stories. Again, we shot 14 times over about 2.5 years, and so I think that the fact that we kept coming back meant a lot to people. They got to know us over that time, and they saw the short that I had made previously, which again I think spoke well of kind of the style and the approach that we were trying to take to these issues. And again, it is a lot of time. I mean, we interviewed tons of people. I mean, the chief of police for the White Earth Nation, and Winona LaDuke, a very again well-known activist who's actually running to be the chairwoman right now, and then with the Minnesota Department of Corrections, that was also a very long process of earning their trust. And we interviewed a lot of wardens and a lot of different people working within the system, all sort of on background. And we were the first independent film crew to film inside the Minnesota Department of Corrections. So that was, again, one of the critical moments, I would say, in production is when Rob was sentenced to go back for a 5th time. Obviously that was a very daunting situation, and we didn't know would we be able to go, and follow him inside and tell that part of the story, which we thought was really important. So I don't know. I mean, it's always tricky, these questions of access and trust, but mostly it's just spending time with people, talking with them, hearing them, and building it.
Yeah, I didn't know I was a potential lifesaver until I had the responsibility to keep these guys alive on the res. I would go into places and they'd be like, "Who's out there?" I'm like, "Yeah, some film guys." They're like, "Really? They got stuff. We can rob them." I'm like, "No, let's not do that. Let's totally not do that." But
yeah, we would hear that because he would have a wireless mic on, so we'd be sitting outside and being like, "Should we leave right now?"
Yeah, we should really credit Rob as a producer too, because he did talk us out of a lot of situations.
In the back, yes. You.
I just would like to say to Rob, Gunesh Chish, in my own Tlingit language, Gunesh Chish, thank you for calling out the power and the strength of our people and our cultures. And Kevin, I'd like to ask you, at the beginning of the movie, you talked about a real hopelessness, that my neighborhood is never going to change. It's always been this way and it always will be this way. And I'm just wondering how you feel about that now.
It is still the same, and that's why I moved away. Because if I wouldn't have moved away, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you guys. I probably would be just, it'd be never ending. Like, you'd probably see me on headline news or something. Like this made a big like impact. Like, I don't know, on what I think about life and my goals. But it's just like what I said there. In my town, there really is no hope because the kids grew up the way we grew up, and the younger they are, the more they're getting in trouble. And like when I lived around there, I couldn't even trust nobody around, like not even 9, 10-year-old kids, because they were out stealing, shooting, doing all that stuff. Like, and that's what I don't want to happen. I don't want a 9, 10-year-old going into a house and getting shot because he broke into that house. Like, that's what I grew up around. And it's still like that today. And if I could do something to change it, I would.
And, yes, yeah.
Bonjour, Ginawa, Babashki Maingo, Alan Roy, Migi Kangoing Gae, Mami Dogan. My name is Alan Roy. I'm the Director of Strategic Affairs for the White Earth Tribal Government. And first of all, I want to thank you for being here and telling your story. It's really important that your story is heard. And my question is because I'm curious, and what are your plans from this step forward? And would you be willing to go back home and have a discussion with your government?
I'm more than willing to do that, and I have been more than willing to do that. And I've tried so many times to call directly to them, use emails, use social media, and it's more or less I was resigned to, like, okay, maybe they're just comfortable ignoring this. Like, this is a big thing to actually own, and that's part of the problem with me. Is I wouldn't become the man that I am, the teacher that I am, the father that I am today, if I didn't totally like acknowledge that there was a problem. And not only acknowledge that, but to understand that I can be part of a solution. So I'm totally willing to open any type of dialogue with any position in a position to help and totally collaborate with them, or to just listen. I haven't even yet talked to anybody. I wish that would happen. So I'm more than open to going back and making this thing special or difficult, but I just want to make this happen. Because you see right now that there's power with this film. It's told in such a way. It's a story that takes the worst parts of my life and some of this kid's life, and it totally puts out there that, hey, there's still hope for these people, you know? And that's powerful. But not only is that powerful, that's responsibility. Man, I'd love to go back and do this.
Caso tomati. Taukatila wika inna watilokat. No te kiwatas carnesia malacuane, sweetie. Meteo poyan. I'm albino. And I wanted to make sure we didn't go tonight and not forget that this is a beautiful thing that's going on, and especially with those represented here from Washington and on any policy level. This lady asked about doing work frontline before they get to that level, and I appreciate that. The work we doing together is really kind of like working with the extreme versus the mainstream. And one of the reasons why is that the extreme have been abandoned. It's not popular to work with this particular population in the country, let alone Indian country. These are the throwaways all across the board. And so, you know, where all resources are being dedicated to, you know, let's get them before they get there, I appreciate that. But what happens with this? We have dozens and dozens of years of incarceration on my staff. We say we are who we serve, yours truly included. My thing is we need to do it all. Work on the front line, but make sure we don't forget those who have great influence on the shorties and that upcoming generation, and we don't abandon them. Reason why we have such a great need for this is because treatment, intervention, diversion, and therapy have been replaced with incarceration. We don't have that. And so, yeah, you know, I appreciate being here and the opportunity to talk, you know, here at the White House about this kind of thing. I've read up on all of you a little bit, and I'm hoping that we can use this as a call to action. I said it before at one of our other, you know, events, that this needs to be a real call to action, and that we take, you know, this seriously, because once this is all done and good and gone, they're going right back to this, and these same issues are going to exist. It's going to be up to us. It's all going to be on us to deal with it, right? So we need everybody's help here, and especially those in positions of power, influence, and policy in any other way, resources.
Thank you. Troy, do you want to talk just a bit about sort of that particular issue of incarceration kind of being kind of having taken the place of some of this, of the trying to think of the word I'm looking for, more rehabilitative policies?
Well, to a certain extent, I agree. To a certain extent, I disagree. Depending on the prison sentence someone receives, in the federal institution anyways, they can go into an intensive drug rehab program while they're there. I think one of the qualifications is that their sentence be in excess of 1.5 years or something like that, possibly a little longer. It takes 1 year just to get through the program, and then it'll take up to 1 year off their sentence while they're incarcerated. I certainly can't speak to the Minnesota state criminal justice system and what they may or may not be doing, but we certainly are looking at alternatives. In South Dakota, I know in the last 3 months, I've been on 5 different reservations where we've been holding meth summits. The communities, the tribal leaders have been setting these up. We've been educating them on what the department is doing as far as helping them with the meth epidemic that is currently going through Indian country. As a matter of fact, I was supposed to be at the Yankton Sioux Tribes Meth Summit today, and we'll be doing one in Standing Rock in, I think, 2 weeks. So this is a topic of conversation and concern throughout Indian country, and we are trying to identify ways where we can get help to people like Kevin and Rob without turning them into a felon, because one of the things we recognize is the gap in Indian country right now is the difference between the tribal court system and the federal system. The tribal court systems right now can only sentence up to 1 year. So they don't really have the ability to put any teeth into people who are appearing in front of them on a regular basis for some of these meth possession and meth ingestion cases, because they don't have enough time to try and get the rehabilitation in effect. So there's a middle ground that's missing, and that's the gap that usually the city and the state fill. So we don't want to turn everyone into a felon.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question, if anyone has one.
I have a question. there were some very striking images of burning sofas, a car, I think there were 2 chairs, and the title of the film was Seventh Fire, but I didn't understand the significance of that.
Rob, maybe you'd want to speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, you seen 3 fires and 4 of them are missing. No, just kidding. I did not know that the film was going to be called The Seventh Fire, but I immediately seen the importance. I was nonetheless fortunate enough to pay attention when my grandparents spoke in Ojibwe-Moan, and so I had privilege to be around to receive those old teachings. So hundreds of years ago, the Anishinaabe, the Ojibwe people, were really populated on the East Coast. And we had no reason to leave, but nonetheless, we had every reason to leave because certain individuals received prophecies. So you're gonna have to go from here to a place where it's really bountiful and you're getting along with your neighbors, and you gotta fight through tooth and nail to get to this place where the food grows on water, where the blueberry is, where the strawberries grow. But nonetheless, these individuals had the responsibility to convince a really powerful nation to pick up and move in such a fashion that it's going to take over 600 to 700 years to places around the Great Lakes. One in particular is Minnesota, where I'm an enrolled member of the White Earth Chippewa Indians. That title itself, it's really hard to claim that. So nonetheless, there's 7 prophecies, 7 fires, and the 7th fire prophecy, this is, some people are believing, some individuals are believing that we're in that 7th prophecy right now, where we learn the ways of another. We totally seen that this way is very unproductive, it's very toxic. So we have every reason to go back and to pick up our culture. And that's how we're gonna try to work our way out of this mess that we allowed ourselves to get into through our own actions. So there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that and accountability and all that. But nonetheless, we can't go against the prophecies. I sure as heck can't. I'm nobody to tell a Medewan member or a Joss kid or a medicine man or anybody that's in that life to say, hey, you're wrong, because I don't know anything about what's going on. So I got to submit myself to that. So it's actually pretty ingenious that Jack would pick that out and name it the 7th fire. It's totally fitting because you see me becoming powerful again, and I see that. And I only got that way I let that way go in my teenage years, but I actually became powerful again by practicing my culture again. It's the seventh fire prophecy in action.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone on the panel. Thank you for coming. I think we're finished. So unless
Chris,
Jack,
did you want to add?
Chris,
I didn't want to say anything other than don't forget Leonard Peltier. And I don't know that, it's been 40 years, and I don't know where that lies, but it's important in this conversation. I think that there's a history here of dysfunction that we're looking at, and that I think that needs to be examined also. And if there's an administration to do it, I would think it would be probably this one. So I didn't want to leave that out.
thank you. I think we're done.